Hey everybody, Plushie here, and I apologize once again. Finally, right before the event is about to end, I'm going to make the Aoko hot take video. I've just been a little bit unmotivated with long-form content in recent times, and Aoko is not the easiest character to make a hot take video on because of her really complicated kit. Most of the time will probably be spent talking about her kit in this video, so yeah, hopefully I can get my motivation back right around anniversary. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Aozaki Aoko, and the way I'm going to format this hot take video is I'm going to talk about her base form first in terms of introducing her kit, and then I will go into her transformed Super Aoko form. So, Aoko, base form. Let's take a look at her base stats. Her attack stat is sort of middle of the road, and not too high, not too low, a little bit below average, which is just fine. This is not the main form she will be staying in anyways, and she has a MP gain rate of 0.55% at base, and she has a double arts double buster deck. And the 0.55% base gain is pretty standard on this kind of deck. 3 hit arts, 4 hit quick, 3 hit buster, 5 hit extra attack. The extra attack is quite strong, but overall it's just a very standard. Her attribute is currently man, and it will change after she transforms, but no really significant synergy is present in either form's attribute, so I'm not going to dwell on it either. So Aoko's first skill pre-transformation is actually tied to one of her main gameplay gimmicks, which is magic bullets. So magic bullets is a specific buff that whenever Aoko attacks with her normal attacks is consumed, and it will boost her normal attack by 50% for one time. And then one of the magic bullets will be removed, of course. But when she attacks with her extra attack, then it will consume all magic bullets, however many she has on herself at the time, and then it will give her 50% attack up for each layer consumed, all dumped into her extra attack. So she can technically get a super powerful extra attack off if she has a bunch of magic bullets saved up. And interestingly, the extra attack buffs from the magic bullets can actually go above the normal attack buff cap at 400%. So if you have more than 8 stacks of magic bullets, because once again remember it's 50% attack up per stack of magic bullet, you actually deal even more damage instead of capping. So it's pretty interesting gimmick, and the most amount of magic bullets she can store on herself at one time is 20. So obviously you can go way over 8 stacks if you want a super powerful extra attack. So her first skill gives her 3 of these magic bullet buffs, and it also comes with a 20 star bomb, and it only has a 2-turn cooldown. So it's a pretty nice skill, even at base. It's just like a nice effect to give her great card damage because she can constantly keep refreshing these magic bullets. Also, it's basically like 10 star per turn forever if you keep her in her base form, so it makes her crit pretty consistent as well. But it's just, it's not that relevant because you're usually going to want to transform her, so she's not going to have this skill for long. But, during the time that she has this, it's very spammable. It's actually really nice. Aoko's second skill is a team-wide 20% MP charge per turn for 3 turns, as well as a 10-star generation per turn for 3 turns on a 7-turn cooldown. So honestly, at base, this is just an okay effect. It helps the entire team get their MP, but most importantly, at least in my opinion, helps Aoko herself get her MP fast because she wants to get to that transformation MP as soon as possible. And it also generates 10 star per turn, which is a nice bonus, either for herself to crit to get even more MP gain from her cards, or for the entire party to crit if you have multiple DPSs on your team. This skill has a quite long cooldown at 7, reminds me a little bit of Pope Jones skill 3, which is basically this skill but with an 8-turn cooldown and the star generation replaced with charisma. That skill wasn't the best thing ever. This skill, even with 1 turn shorter cooldown, still isn't the best thing ever. And most importantly, after Aoko transforms, she instantly loses this skill's effect. So if she transforms on turn 2, for example, the remaining 2 turns of this skill's effect is just completely wiped. And spoiler alert, after she transforms, the skill cooldown doesn't come back. So it's not like she instantly gets the new version of her second skill after she transforms. So I honestly don't know why the restriction is placed there. I think it is way overbalancing, and she could have just kept 2 more turns of this effect if she wanted to, even after she transforms. So overall, pretty mediocre skill, especially pretty bummed with that restriction. And finally, Aoko's third skill is a targetable 30% rainbow buff, 30% crit buff, and 2000 HP regeneration buff. And then finally, it also gives the target 3 turns of protagonist correction buff. So protagonist correction is basically a buff that nullifies all demerits on skills and MP effects. I have a whole video made on what actually counts as a demerit. I'll link it in the description below, but as a overview, basically any self HP drain or MP drain effect, self curse, burn, or poison effect, self buff removal effect, self-stun effect, they can all be negated. So servants such as, Frankenstein can prevent themselves from being stunned. Yume-ren can prevent themselves from removing their own buffs after their MP. And then people like Brave Liz can not pay the 50% MP drain on her third skill. But it does not work with self-sacrificial effects such as Arash and Hebetrod. And the skill also doesn't work with Aoko's skill 3 effect after her transformation, because her skill 3 effect drains 100% MP, but it is a cost, not a demerit, which is really dumb, but what are you going to do about it? And this entire skill has a 7-turn cooldown. So this is a really interesting utility skill. Even if we remove the protagonist correction, it's pretty decent. It's targetable, nice amount of HP regeneration. 30% rainbow is honestly quite huge as a targetable buff. Usually it's probably 20%, even if it's just for self. And it also comes with a 30% crit up. This does also give her Yui Shosetsu synergy, and she can even help other people get Yui Shosetsu synergy if you want to use her as more of a support. The skill has a 7-turn cooldown, and fortunately, this does not get removed after she transforms. So honestly, I feel like a lot of the cases you actually use this on Aoko herself, and then you transform, and then you actually still get 3 turns worth of rainbow buffs, crit buffs, and HP regeneration buffs just for herself, which is pretty nice. But this skill obviously also changes effects after she transforms. So honestly, all of these effects you can almost treat as one-time effects, because I feel like you would never activate these a second time, because she will transform before the cooldown comes back, minus her skill 1 because it has such a short cooldown. But yeah, it's a pretty decent skill. Gives her versatility as both a support or as a DPS. So even before transforming, Aoko already has a couple of passives. She has existence outside the domain, which its actual effect doesn't matter. The most important thing is this gives her Van Gogh synergy. She gets 100% extra crit up whenever Van Gogh MPs, which is pretty important. She has Territory Creation E, which is 2% arts up. Doesn't matter. She has Item Construction E, which is debuff success rate up by 2%. Doesn't matter either. And she has Magician C, which gives her 20% debuff resistance up, which is nice. 20% insta-kill resistance up, which almost never come into play. And finally, also 20% buff removal resist, which I genuinely suggest you not rely on this unless you really want to save scum like 1,000 times before this actually works against a boss. And it also transforms all invo effects into solemn defense. Now, I think this is a bit of an overrated effect. This obviously allows her to deal with invo piercing bosses a little bit better, especially if you're soloing with her. But because Aoko is actually an art servant, unlike Kukulkan, she actually does get paired with Castoria almost every single time. And this can actually become a demerit because both Castoria's skill 3 as well as one of Aoko's skills after she transforms does give her invul. So you have to time those a little bit more carefully, because obviously if she has an invul effect on her, it turns into a solemn defense, and this will prevent Castoria to apply her 3-turn lasting solemn defense onto Aoko. So this I wouldn't really say it's a demerit, I guess, but it's kind of a hindrance. It will, force you to play a little bit more carefully when you do pair with Castoria, which is, in my opinion, every single time. So before we actually talk about base Aoko's MP, we have to give a little bit of a context to what Super Aoko is, because that's obviously the main purpose of her MP, which is transforming her into Super Aoko. So as Super Aoko, her base attack stat is actually increased to match the highest out of all SSR foreigners, which is Kukulkan, which is pretty nice. So her deck turns from a double arts double buster deck to a triple arts deck, and her base MP gain rate is nerfed from 0.55% per hit to 0.33% per hit. And even though all the hit counts on each card type remains the same, her buster and extra attack becomes AoE. This is a lot more easy to understand if you play through Lost Belt 7 and use the You Olga Marie NPC. It basically works the exact same, but for people who are unfamiliar, I'll try to explain it with as little words as possible. So first thing to take note of is that the AoE attacks has 50% base scaling, meaning that they do half damage to each target whenever they attack. And second, the AoE attacks actually can space out your attack chains. What I mean by that is that normally if you're attacking one target with a Brave Chain with just cards, even if you killed the target with the first card, you cannot switch targets and the entire chain would just follow through, and then finally ending after the extra attack. But because these AoE attacks are counted as different attack sources or kind of like mini MPs, you can actually switch attack targets if you space your attacks out with these AoE attacks. So for example, if you do Arts, Buster, Arts, then if your Arts killed the first target, then the Buster attack is AoE, your second Arts will actually redirect to the second target. So that's pretty interesting. Has some interesting applications, mainly for breaking guts, for example. So if you have like a boss with multiple guts, instead of only using a standard Brave Chain and then just breaking one guts, you can do single target card, you break one guts, and then you do AoE card, you do break a second guts, and then you go back to a single target card, you break a third guts, and then the extra attack is another AoE attack and it breaks a fourth guts. So against like bosses with multiple guts with like minimal amount of HP, this is a pretty interesting gimmick to counter it. And then finally, the crit chance is calculated separately on each target for her AoE Buster card. So let's say your AoE Buster card has a 70% chance to crit. The 70% chance is rolled individually on each target. So you can have one target that gets crit by this, but the other two targets actually miss, getting crit by the Buster card. And, beyond all of that, her arts cards become one of the worst arts cards in the game. They remain single target, but because of their base gain reduced from 0.55 to 0.33 per hit, they are 0.99% base gain arts cards, and they are so bad. They're worse than Abigail, worse than Durga, only better than Ramaru and Summer Valkyries, I think. Definitely bottom 4 or bottom 5 arts cards in the entire game, so very unfortunate. And overall, I don't think this gimmick is very good. Like, if you've played with You Olga Marie in Lost Belt 7, you would know how underwhelming this gimmick is because of the halved base damage. The trade-off being making her deck just overall shittier with the base gain. I assume the base gain nerf is to counteract her extra attack, being able to attack multiple targets and refund a bunch of MP, but that's such a, overbalancing act again. And overall, I don't like this gimmick at all. I think she should stick with being an AoE arts DPS during challenge quests. So after briefly taking a look at how Super Aoko works, we can come back and look at base Aoko's MP. So base Aoko's MP doesn't really have a lot of effects. It just transforms her. But on top of that, it also gives her a permanent buff on both her Buster and extra attacks, which now we know is significant because they're both AoE attacks that has lower base scaling than a normal card. And that scales with MP level from 20% all the way up to 50%, and they basically act as mana burst type buffs. And then finally, the overcharge effect of the MP is a 3-turn crit up that scales from 30% all the way up to 70%. So the MP itself is honestly pretty bad. You don't refresh your skills, and the permanent card buffs you get are pretty pathetic at lower MP levels, like 20% buff. Yeah, it barely matters. It's like a passive skill almost. And then the crit buff you get is only 3 turns, and even that doesn't have a huge number at Overcharge 1, which is only 30%. So pretty underwhelming MP. Obviously, the main purpose of it is to transform her into Super Aoko, and actually, in order for us to understand Super Aoko's kit better, I think it's actually better if we look at her Super version's MP first. So Super Aoko's MP becomes an AoE 5-hit Arts MP that has Ignore Invul and Ignore Defense, and also deals super effective damage to all enemies depending on how many magic bullets she has on herself. So kind of similar to characters like Charlemagne or Wangina, she can basically create her own universal anti-trait as long as she has this special status on herself. But unlike Charlie or Wangina, she actually consumes these magic bullets whenever she actually uses her MP. So each bullet gives her 10% extra damage, and she can consume up to 10 bullets whenever she MPs. So if the bullets doesn't reach 10, she just consumes all of it and deals corresponding damage. And of course, she can store up to 20 bullets at a time, just as a reminder. And finally, her Overcharge effect is an AoE defense down that happens before MP damage that scales from 10% all the way up to 30%. So the MP itself is honestly pretty decent. It has Ignore Invul and Ignore Defense, which is a pretty nice combo. And she has Universal Anti-Trait. And how strong that Anti-Trait is completely dependent on how easily she can get her magic bullets, which we will get into later when talking about her skill set as Super Aoko. And as a slight spoilers, she actually get it quite easily in a challenge quest context, so the MP is actually pretty strong if you do use her in a slower arts team. And then finally, the Overcharge effect is a defense down before damage, which is pretty nice, but the number is pretty tiny, like 10% is like barely anything at Overcharge 1, so it's not the greatest effect for farming, and overall I don't think she's actually that great at farming, unfortunately, but she does have really good burst damage because of that anti-trait granted by the magic bullets. So now after taking a look at what Super Aoko's MP does, we can go back and look at Super Aoko's skill set, and it will make a lot more sense, at least in my opinion. So the first skill now gives her 6 stacks of magic bullets instead of just 2, but the cooldown is extended to 4. But on top of that, she also gets a 1-turn invul effect, which will turn into Solemn Defense, and a 3-turn 30% arts up instead of the 20 Star Bomb. So honestly, I think this is a very good skill. The 6 immediate magic bullets can allow her to have better burst damage with her MP, and the skill also gives her a very high uptime arts up. Now, I do think that her refund is pretty bad because, you know, AoE 5 hits arts with 0.33 base gain per hit is not amazing to say the least, but this at the very least does boost her damage with a pretty high uptime. And then finally, the invul only at a 4-turn cooldown is honestly very strong in solo play. It also turns into Solemn Defense, but this is also a reason why I think this could be a hindrance, because you want to pair this skill with the MP, you want to like, use it and immediately cash out the 6 stacks of magic bullets with her MP, but at the same time, sometimes with Castoria, you would want to use Castoria's MP and her MP on the same turn, and that Solemn Defense will block Castoria's Solemn Defense effect, so this can be a little bit clunky, but if you just play it smart, this is a very powerful skill with a, you know, very high uptime arts up for damage boosting and extremely well burst damage for her MP by providing massive amounts of magic bullets. Super Aoko's second skill is just a 100 MP battery as well as a 40 Star Bomb on a 7-turn cooldown. This is a reason why you might want to save her skill 2 before transformation and then wait until she transforms and immediately use this in order for her to use her MP. It's pretty useful for farming if you want to use it like that. The Star Bomb is pretty okay. It does allow her and her teammates to basically have guaranteed crits for a turn. It's not that crazy good despite it being such a large number because it is on a 7-turn cooldown, but you know, it's just fair because it's tied to a 100 MP battery, and traditionally 100 MP batteries are always 7-turn cooldowns or more. But another way that you can use this skill is after using the skill, immediately following it with her third skill, which now transformed into a very strong supportive skill that requires at least 100 MP gauge to use, and it drains 100 MP gauge from Aoko, and it gives her a 5-turn 50% buster buff, as well as a 5-turn 100% extra attack buff. And it also charges both her allies with 50% MP charge, as well as reducing their cooldown by 2. And finally, it heals the entire party, including Aoko herself, by 5,000. So This is a very powerful skill. You can see it in two different lights. First of all, you can treat this skill as a damage boost for Aoko herself because she gives herself a massive buster buff as well as extra attack buff, which is pretty important if you want to focus on her AoE attacks. But honestly, I still think the AoE attack thing is a little bit underwhelming despite, oh, this looks like a 5-turn 100% up on extra attack. That's huge, right? But honestly, it's just still not that worth it in my opinion because extra attacks are hard to buff and the AoE buster attack requires you to commit a lot of buster supports, which Aoko doesn't fit very well with. I'll get into that a little bit later. But the skill also is an amazing supportive skill. It's basically casting 2 Koyan Light skill 1s on both her other party members, and it's especially synergizes well with a lot of art supports because they both have strong MPs as well as strong skills. So reducing their cooldown as well as charging their MP gauge just allows them to, support your entire party even better. And a lot of art supports also have MP charging skills and MPs. So even though Aoko's draining 100% of her own charge, it's feeding back into her charge because the supports now with their skills back and their MP back, they can feed more MP charge back into Aoko. So this skill doesn't usually actually feel like a 100 MP drain if you are running her in a more art stall team. The skill, of course, is also a huge 5,000 heal for the entire party, and honestly, I do think with how defensive Castora is and how much she can prevent your entire party from taking damage for multiple turns on end, the massive heal is actually a better form of healing compared to slow heal per turns nowadays for art stall teams. So honestly, I think this skill, even though it does give a huge buff to both her AoE cards, I think the more valuable part of the skill is actually the team supportive effect that allows the entire team to just have better skill rotations as well as better MP spamming. And of course, Super Aoko also gets 2 extra pretty strong passives. The first passive she gets is just 2 extra magic bullet stacks at the end of every turn. So essentially, she's turning that skill 1, remember that skill 1 with a 2-turn cooldown that gives her 2 missiles? Well, now she just gets it every single turn, which is obviously really strong. Combine this with her first skill, even without particularly stacking up, preserving any magic bullets, she can launch an MP with 180% special effectiveness because this is the 2 from the passive plus her first skill's 6 stacks of magic bullets. So this allows her to just always have access to very strong MPs as long as her skill 1 is up. And even when her skill 1 isn't up, her MP at the very least is going to be 20% special effective universally, which is really nice because her MP very much lacks a damage mod. The defense down before damage isn't really that great because of the super small numbers, so this certainly helps with her MP damage a lot. And the other passive she gets is Magic Circuit's Rotation, which gives her a buff that charges the entire party by 10 gauge every single turn, and it gains 3 critical stars every turn. So it's following a theme here where this is like a diet version of her previous skill 2, which charges the entire party by 20 MP per turn and generates 10 stars per turn, but it's only lasts 3 turns and it's on a 7-turn cooldown. And instead, this is a permanent effect, which is really, really strong to have in your arts stall team. Once again, this not just supports her, but also supports the entire party and allow them to spam their strong supportive MP even easier. Before we even talk about Aoko's performance in farming and challenge quests, I think we need to get one thing out of the way, which is how her AoE attacks are pretty bad gimmicks and they're almost never worth considering or building your team around. So first of all, if you really think about it, they're just way worse versions of your MP because of card-based scaling. So I think most people are familiar with how Buster Card does 1.5 times base damage, Arts Card does 1 times damage, Quick Cards does 0.8 times damage, and Extra Attack does 200%. But what some people are not familiar with is how MPs scale. So for an unupgraded AoE MP, which is what Aoko has here, the base scaling for MPs is basically 4.5 times. It's a little bit higher on Quick, which is 4.8, but that is beyond the discussion today. So if you look at it, a Buster Card, in order for it to do as much damage as an MP, it would need 3 times as much damage scaling. But then you realize Aoko's face cards are actually halved if they are AoE damage. So her Buster card actually only has a 0.75 base damage scaling, even weaker than an Arts card, if we only consider one target. So you would need 6 times as many damage buffs as her MP. And the extra attack is slightly better with a base 100% scaling, but it is still 4.5 times weaker than Aoko's MP. Now, the lower damage scaling would be justified if Aoko has easy access to these AoE attacking cards, but she actually doesn't, because she only has one Buster card out of her entire deck, and, you know, in order to trigger her extra attack, she needs to have a Brave Chain, which is even less likely to happen. And on the contrary, her MP is extremely spammable in the correct team. So overall, her MP is going to be showing up way more often than her other AoE attacking cards. So you should always build your team around just Arts DPSing. The only unit that I can mildly accept including to bolster card damage is Van Gogh, because Van Gogh, even without using that Buster card, does help Aoko's other cards crit as well. And in general, Van Gogh is just a great stall unit because she can spam terror, because she can give the entire team attack up and a little bit of heals as well, and a bunch of star generation. So if you want to do like a stall team with Van Gogh and occasionally go a little bit hard with that Buster crit, sure, go ahead. But in most cases, I do believe that Buster cards should be used as a utility tool. For example, if you want to apply a debuff on all enemies very easily, then you can apply a debuffing command code like the Roma command code or the Burn, Curse, or Poison command code on your Buster card in order to trigger specific effects that you desire, such as Honey Lake, or if you want to use her to support someone like Romulus Corinus. As for the extra attack, honestly, I highly recommend you to avoid it like a plague. You can buff it by a lot if you have a lot of magic missile stacks, as well as, combining her MP effect as well as her skill 3 effect, giving her a total of up to 150% card effectiveness up on that extra attack. But it's very hard to further buff that extra attack because it is not an MP, it cannot crit, and it doesn't belong in any card type. So most of the conventional ways to buff it does not work. The only other way to buff that extra attack is perhaps using a power mod, which usually only exists against certain traded enemies or during specific events with an event damage CE. So unfortunately, I really don't think spending your magic missiles on your extra attack is ever worth it compared to just spending them on her MP. In terms of farming, I think Aoko is more than a little bit awkward. In terms of single core, the biggest issue is obviously she's not able to do damage with her first MP, but there are ways to work around it, and that way is of course bringing a self-sacrificing MP damage dealer. So the most simple team that you can build with Aoko is of course using double Castoria, Arash, Aoko, and Oberon. So what you do is you use both Castorias. You use a plug suit to plug out the first Castoria into the second one and fully charge Aoko, as well as charging Arash with your spread batteries, as well as Arash's own battery, and unlock a pen too. And then you use Aoko's MP into Arash's MP, overcharging Arash's MP as well, and also killing Arash off while Aoko transforms. And then in the following turn, Aoko uses her 100 MP battery and uses her first MP, and as long as she refunds more than 30, which is very easy because her passive actually gives her 10, so she only actually has to refund 20, you're able to use Oberon to fully charge her and use her to fire off a second MP. Now, this is obviously all good and well, but at that point, any AoE Arts units can farm like this. Even AoE Arts units that people consider to have no refund, like Shuten Doji or Saber Shiki, they can farm better than Aoko in terms of the MP charge situation because they don't always need a sacrificial MP on the first turn. But Aoko does have an edge of being able to do massive amounts of damage on the third wave if we don't consider specific anti-traits. If you do save Aoko's post-transformation skill 1 until the third wave, she actually does even more damage than Summer Ibuki, if we consider, MP2 with Black Grail and double Castoria. But is that really worth using Aoko to farm single core? I'm not 100% convinced still, because, you do still need to tag in a sacrificial MP unit on the first wave, and sometimes they're not actually able to kill the first wave, depending on the wave formations. I understand that this event came with Sojiro, who can potentially deal with higher HP but only one enemy first waves, but even then it is still not very guaranteed for Sojiro to be able to kill, and overall it's just not as flexible as a normal arts looper, because you always have to at the very least have someone MP on the first turn instead of Aoko herself. Now I see a lot of discussion regarding her multi-core utility, especially when comboed with special units such as Arcoade, who gives living human extra charge, or someone like Tonaliko. But I actually believe her multi-core is even worse than her single core, and here's the reason why. So in multi-core, basically what you are taking advantage of is spread charges not only charging one target. So in a single core situation, if you use someone like Koyan Dark as a support, her AoE 30 MP battery is just a 30 MP battery. But if you actually have multiple DPSs in your party, it can go up to 60% or even 90%, because that team-wide charge actually benefits all 3 units that will potentially fire off their MP. And if we look at Aoko, her net gain in terms of battery is actually extremely tiny, because you need to pay a 100% MP charge up front to transform her before she gets that back in the form of her second skill, which is a 100 MP battery. And if you choose to use her third skill, which is what most people use in multi-core farming, it does charge her other allies by 50 each, but it also means that it drains her entire MP bar. So you're minusing 100 MP to charge a total of 100 MP. So there's no net gain in MP charge there. The only net gain of MP charge with Aoko in a multi-core setup is the passive 10% party-wide MP charge per turn, so it really isn't amazing. It's very hard to work with, and the only partner I can think of that works well with Aoko is Tonaliko, because Tonaliko doesn't just want MP charge like most other multi-core farmers. She also wants overcharge and cooldown reduction, and Aoko actually is able to provide her that. So this is the one comp that I came up with that I feel like is at least mildly competent in multi-core when we consider Aoko, which is Castoria, Tonaliko, Aoko, and we plug out Castoria for Tezcatlipoca. As you can see here, basically you still have to commit a lot of charge into Aoko on the first turn in order to trigger her transformation, because she doesn't have any immediate battery in her kit. But Aoko here actually achieves something, which is increasing Tonaliko's overcharge by 1, which reduces her third skill's cooldown by an extra turn. And then on the second turn, after she has transformed, she can use her battery and then her skill 3 to further reduce Tonaliko's third skill cooldown. And then Tonaliko is able to trigger that third skill and charge the entire party, which is a lot of net charge. And also, it feeds back into Aoko's own MP charge. And by the third turn, you realize, oh, I have both Tonaliko's MP and Aoko's MP, and obviously I can use both of them for better damage, but at the same time, why wouldn't I use someone like Koyan Light instead of Aoko, who can achieve the same thing for Tonaliko, allowing her to MP as many times, but also focus my damage on Tonaliko instead of having 2 separate MPs do mediocre damage. Maybe Aoko can work better if farming nodes are usually more than 3 waves, but they're really rare, and even then, you can definitely have better options for that with other multi-core compositions that just has better total amount of MP charge compared to this composition. And even then, like, we did have that at the start of this Mahoyo collab event, but by like day 3, they stopped doing that as well because they know it's really obnoxious, and instead of 6 wave farming nodes, we got 6 enemy waves and still 3 waves worth of farming. So overall, I don't think Aoko is great at multi-core either, just because of her basically not giving you any net MP charge. And of course, Aoko can also fit as a looping support because she does have 20% MP charge per turn and a targetable rainbow buff, so she can fit in both arts and quick. But usually those are just if you really want to force Aoko into your comp so you can bond farm her. Otherwise, you would always have a better option than her. And then finally, don't even try to farm with her AoE Buster Crit card because it is very inconsistent, and even if you bring Summer BB for card lock, you would need to get that 1 out of 5 Buster card on the first turn, which is horrendous RNG, never worth it. In terms of Challenge Quest performance, I think Aoko is extremely powerful. Her MP has universal anti-trait as long as she has enough magic missile stacks. Her MP also pierces invul and ignores defense, which allows her to do very meaningful damage through most boss gimmicks. And despite being a AoE DPS that has some team-wide support abilities, I do not believe she actually is fit to support a second DPS. Instead, I think her support ability is best when supporting other supports, mainly because that skill 3, being able to charge very powerful support servants MPs as well as reduce their cooldown. Her passive 10% charge per turn as well as the 10-star generation of course helps as well. I think Aoko's best teammate is of course Castoria, which should be a given since she's an art servant, and Castoria is just one of the most busted Challenge Quest support ever to begin with, but Aoko of course has even better synergy with her than other AoE arts DPSs because she's able to reduce her cooldown and charge her MP, making her even more broken, being able to spam her solemn defense, attack buffs, as well as her arts buffs and team-wide battery to feed back into Aoko's charge. Another great teammate is of course Van Gogh, who has very powerful skills and an MP that can both support the team defensively by spamming terror as well as buffing Aoko specifically because she has the existence outside of domain passive and make all of her cards crit extra hard, even the AoE Buster card. Of course, I can bring up all the great art supports, but I want to specifically highlight Tamamo as being one of Aoko's best teammates, because Tamamo's MP is very similar to Aoko's skill 3, being able to heal the entire party, charge the entire party's MP, and reduce the entire party's cooldown. So when you have Aoko who charges Tamamo's MP and reduce her cooldown, it actually helps Tamamo come back and charge Aoko's MP and reduce her cooldown. So this sort of becomes a positive feedback loop and creates a very interesting team when you have double Tamamo and one Aoko. This team is able to keep the entire party's cooldown short at all times, the entire party's HP high at all times with the constant heal spam, and of course the entire party's MP gauge constantly at a very high level, being able to spam their MP almost infinitely. Even though this team doesn't have the instant access to hard defense like Castoria team does, this team can keep the enemy from MPing very often because of the constant spam of Tamamo's curse skill, and Tamamo themselves can also spam their morph skills in order to not take much damage from standard attacks. And finally, Aoko herself, with her cooldown being constantly reduced, can also have her first skill be a very short cooldown invul, being able to trigger it every 2 to 3 turns. And because of how many magic missiles she gets from spamming her skill 1, she's able to spam her MP more often with a higher number of magic missile boost than to a normal arts stall team with Castoria. So I highly recommend trying out this team. It's really fun, but once again, unfortunately, this heavily benefits if your Aoko is over MP1, so she can manually charge to more than 100% MP, so she still has the chance to MP on the same turn that she uses her skill 3. And finally, I think Aoko also fits very well in a solemn spam team in place of Merlin because of her passive being able to give the entire team 10% MP charge per turn as well as generate stars every single turn. This team is obviously not going to have as much passive charge as a Merlin build after Merlin ramps up, but this team is also going to be a lot more offensive than the Merlin build because Aoko has a very powerful MP. Now, if you do want to fully overcharge Castoria's MP every 3 turns, you aren't able to use Aoko's MP as often as a standard arts team. However, this actually benefits Aoko because, as I mentioned before, Aoko kind of wants to wait a little bit to ramp up magic missile stacks before she actually uses her MP in order to fire off a more powerful MP, and this team is perfect for that kind of playstyle. Aoko also has her skill 3, which is a burst heal over Merlin's heal per turn, and I believe that is a better form of healing in this kind of team because usually you're not taking any damage, so your HP is going to be at full at almost all times, so the heal per turn is going to be wasted. And instead, usually whenever you take damage is when you screw up and you accidentally miscalculate your MP charge and you miss a single turn of solemn defense and you take massive amounts of damage from the enemies. And in that case, having a burst heal that can immediately correct your mistake and heal the entire party back to full is way more preferable. And of course, once again, that skill 3 can also come in clutch if you suddenly don't have enough charge or you just screw up your chains and you want to immediately pop your defensive skills. Then, you know, reducing the cooldown of both Castoria and Rhaenys as well as charge the MP by 50 can usually save you in a pinch. So I think this is a really fun build as well. I've used this and I've tried and not taken a single bit of damage while still doing very respectable damage with Aoko in return. So another team I really like, probably one of the best like defensive arts teams in the game right now that doesn't really require you to stall for a super long amount of time. And before I end the challenge quest segment, I just wanted to mention that I don't think Aoko is generally a very good solo servant. Yes, she does have the ability to do AoE damage with her face cards, but because of how bad her MP gain is, she isn't able to use her MP very often at all, and especially without the additional support from other MP charging supports, her poor face card gain really gets emphasized here. She also misses out on additional MP gain from Brave Chains if you're soloing something like a prison tower where there's multiple waves. She doesn't actually complete her attack if she kills the enemy with just her first 3 attacks, because her extra attack is considered a separate attack since it's AoE. Aoko also only has one meaningful sense of sustain, which is her 5000 HP heal, which is pretty nice if it doesn't have a 7-turn cooldown and require her to drain her entire MP gauge to actually use. With all that being said, Aoko still has a very short cooldown, 4-turn cooldown in fact. Solemn defense on her first skill, and her ability to space out attacks actually help her a lot in terms of soloing against bosses that have multiple guts as their gimmick. So there are still specific uses for her in solo, it's just that it's very niche. In conclusion, I think Aoko is an extremely experimental servant with a bunch of brand new gimmicks put into her, and unfortunately Lasengo doesn't seem to know how much restrictions they should put on those brand new gimmicks, and they seem to put a little bit too much restrictions onto her. There are traces of overbalancing all over the place with this character, with the halved base damage of her AoE attacking cards, with her nerfed deck after she transforms, with her removing her skill 2 effect whenever she transforms, and her transformation not refreshing any of her skill cooldowns. Overall, she just feels a little bit lackluster compared to what she seems to be on paper. In terms of farming, because of her forced transformation, it's very awkward to use, and even though she does end up functioning in both single core and multi-core, a lot of the times it does feel like you are shoehorning her in, and you would be better off with just a standard AoE arts unit. And in terms of challenge quests, her arguably most eye-catching feature, which is the AoE attacking face cards, ends up not being optimal at all, and you even want to actively avoid her extra attack a lot of the times because you don't want to waste your magic missiles, and instead you want to spend it on her MP, and she just ends up being a great AoE arts DPS in stall teams, which I'm not discrediting at all. I do believe that this is the most powerful way to tackle challenge quests, which is have a DPS that helps your supports do even better supporting. And Aoko has some of the safest team builds in the entire game without having to actually go full degen stall and still maintain a very respectable level of DPS. However, this is just not the kind of servant that most people are excited to roll for. Most people want explosive DPSs that are also good at farming, and unfortunately I think Aoko is neither of those things. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's kind of a mess because Aoko is such a difficult servant to tackle. I did cut out a lot of stuff from the script already, and I still have a lot of stuff ended up being recorded. So hope this is not too confusing, and I hope I did cover most of the essentials, but if you have any question, please feel free to ask in the comments. And I think Aoko, sort of has a reputation shift since she came out. I do believe she was heavily overrated when she first came out. People are saying she's like the second best foreigner just below Kukulkan. I don't believe that is the case. But then I still think Aoko has a lot of things that people should appreciate, even though slow play is not the most exciting thing ever. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and best of luck on rolling for Aoko, and I'll see you guys in the next one.